Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the Quiz Marketing Podcast. Today, I am joined by Julie Bjelland, who is a licensed psychotherapist and the founder of Sensitive Empowerment. We are going to talk through some quizzes that Julie has made and get behind the scenes of those quizzes and how they're formulated. I'm super excited about this because I've gone through your quizzes and really appreciated the thought behind them. So thanks for being here, Julie.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah. So let's dive right into it. If you want to share with the audience, what are the main quizzes? Because I know you have a couple that you've created, and what was the reason behind creating those?
Yes. Well, years ago, I created a sensitivity quiz. That's been my specialty, is working with the highly sensitive population. And more recently, I created an autism quiz because we're actually finding out that our understanding of autism has changed. And now there are hundreds of thousands of adults, including myself, that have discovered that we are autistic. And so it's been a means of helping people. I really see it as a way to help people understand themselves. It's like an entry point into that. So I really created them based on patterns that I was seeing, because my autistic brain is very good at coming up with patterns. I'm seeing, certain things in this population. So that's how I approached it, is by putting those particular things into the questions. So, and in terms of kind of coming up with it, I think it was a process. Like I kind of edited it over time, kind of getting to know this population more, also getting feedback from people. If sometimes, um, they'll make a statement about something and I'll realize like, oh, they didn't quite understand that. So I'm going to reword it. So I did kind of keep up with really kind of evolving it, and it's been incredible because then it leads into, once people take the quiz, they give their email, now they're part of my newsletter, and I'm able to give them even more education and information. So it's been a really great process.
That's awesome. The patterns jump out at me because that's something that a lot of people struggle with is finding a pattern to formulate a quiz around. What did that process look like for you, and what were the patterns that you ended up seeing that turned into the quiz?
Yeah, I think it's great for, if people get to know their audience and where are they challenged, where are things that they are searching for online, and talking to clients and different people, you kind of get to know what are the words they're using, what is the language they're using, what are they understanding about it. And it's an interesting process too, because like for the autism one, it's been more complicated because there are still so many people that wouldn't take an autism quiz because they assume that they're not autistic, because we had inaccurate information about autism before. So I've also designed a quiz that's kind of a discovery one. So I've got the actual autism quiz for people that are really exploring this, because there's a lot of people exploring this, but then also a discovery one that would be for people that wouldn't normally take an autism quiz. But through the process of taking that quiz, they're like, oh, I resonate with these things. And so then that kind of helps them get in the door. So there's like a direct and indirect way, in a way too. And really my goal has been about education, because it's so life changing to understand our experience in the world. And this is such a good entry point because it's easy, it's free. People can do it in just a couple of minutes. People share it with others if it's a good quiz. And then you're really increasing your audience and your ability to help them. That's where, my heart is behind everything that I do. So my goal is to help people understand themselves, because if we understand ourselves, we can take care of ourselves better, improve our mental health, improve our physical health, all of it.
From your perspective, I like the education aspect that you mentioned. From your perspective, how does a quiz encourage people to consume, for lack of a better term, more education? Like, how does it spark curiosity and motivate them to want to learn more? How does that work for you?
Yeah, that's a good question. I have so many people that say to me that they'll say things like, I feel like you were reading my mind. I feel like you just explained me. And that's the thing, is like, if you are good at being able to explain the different traits, for example, of sensitivity, or the different traits of autism, you're targeting them because you're able to. I mean, that's what happens if somebody's felt, and much of this population has felt misunderstood for a big part of their life, and now they took a quiz that they're like, oh my gosh, I just checked every single one of these boxes. How does this person know me so well? So it's you're really engaging them, and it develops an immediate trust, because they're like, wow, this person really understands me. I want to learn more. And that's where I think kind of the magic of it comes.
That checks out with me a lot from a lot of the quizzes that I've seen. It is that personal trust of like whoever is asking me these questions clearly gets what I'm going through, because they're able to ask questions that make sense or are actually things that are on my mind. So you're like reading my mind. And then it's almost like it's not exactly the same, but it's kind of the same as why everyone loves to follow an influencer that says something, but they wouldn't necessarily follow a company that says the same thing, is that individual connection.
Yeah.
And you mentioned this earlier, and maybe this is the answer to this question, but you mentioned knowing your audience. And I think my follow on to that is it's not really easy to read people's minds. Like you kind of have to know a lot about them in order to ask a question that feels like you're reading their mind. So, is there anything in particular that you do or like practices that you follow in terms of getting to know who's in your audience, or is that just something that develops over time, over lots of conversations? Like, any insights for us on that?
Yeah, I think it does develop over time. I think initially when I started this process years ago, I mean, I started out with that zero audience, as everybody does when they first start, and it really grew quite rapidly over time. And it started out with me realizing, when I was working with clients, I was like, wow, they're all experiencing kind of the same challenges, and the same solutions were working for them. And I was like, wow, we got to get this information out there to help more people. This is how I've always led. Everything that I do is like, how can I help more people? And so I started talking about it, writing about it, wrote books, created courses, started talking in lots of people's podcasts, and just getting invited. It kind of just spread like that. You're on somebody's podcast, and then somebody listens to that, and you get invited to another one. So you're sort of talking about it and there's sort of a way we look at it too, especially for psychotherapists, for example, working in this kind of a field. Your audience ends up being you, who you are. Like they're following you because they relate to you, and they hear you talking about your own challenges, and you're talking about things from an authentic place, and real. I think I've been really real and raw, and providing a lot of really practical solutions that help a lot. And I think that that's where people start following you more, because they're really relating, they're really learning, you're saying things that are helping them a lot. And then they start wanting to learn more from you. And this is a great way of doing it. So like if you're doing a social media live, or you're on somebody's podcast, and you're telling them that you have this free quiz, that's a great next step for them. Say, oh, I want to check out this quiz and learn more. And then it's kind of this beautiful funnel, but it's like a human one that's developed from the heart to heart. And I think that's why it works so well.
I like that you mentioned those activities of going on podcasts or showing up in different places and talking as who you are. And the word that comes to mind to me as you're talking about that is like your audience is attracted to what you're talking about because maybe they feel similar or they can resonate with certain aspects of it. And that, it sounds like, was like part one. And then part two is using a well-placed quiz to then move people over to an email list and a deeper connection. Does that sound right?
Yes, and kind of learning the process because when I first started, I really I didn't take any business classes or anything and didn't understand that aspect. But I learned as I went, and that was part of it was you getting people on your email list allows them to get to know you more and more. And eventually, I mean, they talk about someone doesn't usually buy from you until they've had several interactions with you in different ways. Um, so I learned about that, even created like a course for other sensitive and neurodivergent people. Like, how do you even run a business as a sensitive and neurodivergent person? And there are aspects to that that are important to understand, and the type of self-care and the way we can take care of ourselves. But it's like you're creating these several different ways for people to get to know you and connect to you because there's so many people talking about so many things. I think that the most successful situations are when someone feels connected and they feel understood and they feel like you get them and you've said things that make them feel that way. And then that's like that crossover to now I trust you. I mean, I've had people tell me they've followed me for so many years. So why do they continue to do that? It's because they trust what I'm saying. They feel like I understand them. And these things are so important. I think that human connection, and especially an audience of sensitive and neurodivergent people that are used to feeling misunderstood. It's really helpful to hear somebody talking about. I'm going to have people that say to me, "It's like, wow, you talk about being autistic in such an empowered way," and now I understand it's because it isn't a disorder or a deficit; it's a difference, and it's on purpose. And and these are things that we need in the world, just like in nature we need biodiversity to thrive, we need neurodiversity to thrive. I often use examples of plants, like if a plant is not doing well, we don't blame the plant. We find what does the plant need to thrive, right? And so that's how we need to look at humans as well.
I agree with that. And I think what I'm hearing from you, and I want to ask you a deeper question on this, but what I'm hearing from you is specifics of what you talk about that allows people or invites people to connect with you, that creates that connection. But my broader question there is, what is connection? Because this word comes up all the time for us. And there's just so many different ways to think about it or approach it. But curious from your perspective, with all your experience, what do you see as connection, especially online? Like, how do you do that, and like, what is it?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think it has a lot to do with feeling seen. When you hear somebody talking and they're describing your experience, you feel seen. And I've always been open about, my own challenges, but also providing solutions to those challenges, things that I know work based on my training and my research and my interest in how the brain works, how the nervous system works. And much of this came about from, my own challenges living in a world that's not set up for me. So being able to connect in those ways. And I've had so many people say to me, I've heard so many people talk about this, but it's the way you talk about it that just something just kind of clicks for me. And I think that in general, and that would show up in how we develop a quiz too, the language we're using and you making sure that it's how you talk, using the words in the way that you talk, and because it's coming from that really human perspective.
Mm. And that's hard, I think. I find it to be hard. I think a lot of people find it to be hard. How you talk translating onto the internet. I don't know why exactly. Maybe I don't know, maybe the early internet told us that we shouldn't talk normal, and like we should use different ways of communicating, and now it's kind of gotten to a point where if you want to be authentic, you have to talk the way that you talk.
Yeah.
And I guess that's also just something that comes with time and practice. Like, you just have to go through the reps of like you talk online a lot or you write online a lot, and over time it becomes more and more natural. Um, but do you have any specific tips in terms
Yeah.
of, because you do, you create a lot of content, you do a lot of speaking and podcasts, like, is there anything that you do or practices that you follow to increase your ability to just kind of show up? Authentic is the best word I have, but
Yep.
like something like so authentically over time.
That's a good word to use because nobody connects to perfect. Brene Brown talks about this concept a lot, that if we're showing up acting perfect, and I think that a lot of social media influencers and, just in general, I think we're showing ourselves online. We want to look like we have it all together. We want to look like everything's perfect and we don't have any challenges. People don't connect to that because that's not their experience. And I think like showing up authentically means you are showing up as that real raw version of yourself that's talking about that these things are hard for you too. And I think we actually connect via imperfection. I mean, that's an interesting concept, don't you think?
I think it's fascinating. But what immediately comes to mind is like also on the Brene Brown thing, right? In the Dare to Lead book, she gives an example where like going up in front of a crowd or going up in front of your team and just saying, I have no idea what I'm doing is not connection. That's not authenticity. That's not vulnerability. That's something else. I forget what it is. Not great. Um, and so I think that's where I do kind of see people struggle because I think they're afraid of flipping over to like, oh, now I'm just asking other people to like take responsibility for me or help me or something like that versus showing up with a level of confidence and authority in areas where you do have a lot of knowledge, but also weaving in the fact that you don't always get it right and some things are imperfect. And that's, I think, very hard to do, especially when you're then trying to translate that over to like, oh, I only have, 15 words to write a sentence and I'm trying to communicate both of those things. Have you found anything there that helps you to like both show up as an authority because you are, but also weave in the fact that you're not always perfect or you don't always have all the answers?
Yeah, I think that I don't know if I've ever like shown up and just like shared my problems with and not given any solutions or given any ideas. I think it's a combination of that, like being human, talking about these are the, and then giving, part of things that I think people like a lot about my work is that I give really practical solutions, like easy to do stuff that help support the sensitive nervous system, help support mental health, physical health, and kind of identifying like what are the areas that generally this population of people are struggling, and then kind of targeting that in your language that you're talking about it. So you're kind of doing the piece about, yes, I'm identifying with this challenge, and then you're giving them ideas and solutions afterwards. So it's kind of full circle, but also making sure that you're identifying that the goal is not to be perfect all the time, because that's not even possible. I mean, I remember having somebody tell me one time years ago that I was talking about something and they were like, oh, you still are challenged by things? I thought the goal was like that everything was just going to be perfect if we did these things. And that's not a good thing to like set up that kind of a goal for people, because you're never going to reach that. And new challenges land in your lap. So I think it's important to talk about like these things, these solutions will help reduce that challenge. It may not get rid of it completely, but it will reduce it in a sense that it'll make your life better. And normalizing imperfection and normalizing authenticity. In my population and my audience, they only connect with authentic. They don't connect with like really aggressive marketing strategies that will completely turn them off, because this is a group of people that are sensitive to that. And kind of that's something to know too about everybody's audience, to understand their audience, what they and listen, like when you get feedback, are you seeing feedback that is similar? Are you seeing it more than once? And can you evolve and start to shift some of the way that you're wording things, for example, that supports that?
Mm. I think that I'm seeing a broader trend of people shifting away from responding to the overly aggressive, over the top, like get rich quick scheme. I don't know if it's a societal shift or a stage of technology shift. I mean, we've had the internet for 40 plus years now, and maybe people are starting to warm up to it and be like, oh, this is reality. I shouldn't believe some, grand scheme that I see just because it's online now. I don't know exactly what's going into that, but
Yeah.
I think a lot of people are going through a similar shift there where it's like you're moving away from just like here's a solution to then like this is a lot more nuanced than that. Um, I liked the framework that you had there, or at least the framework that I heard, which is like you got to change the goal away from perfection. And that's one way to infuse authenticity. And then you also have to, or at least the way that you described it is like you present an issue, and maybe it's something that you personally face, and then you present ways to improve on it, or maybe things that you personally do to improve on that issue. And then the third part of that is making it clear that the goal is not to make this go away. The goal is to make it better. Does that sound roughly like how you thread that needle of being authoritative but also imperfect?
Yeah, I think it makes it attainable. And I think that the market is so saturated. There are so many people trying to sell so many things. It's really overwhelming, and especially for sensitive people. And I think that I've also had this strategy that I feel like that's been, I don't even know, I don't even think I thought of it as a strategy, but it's something that I've done, which is create different levels of support and different levels. And each one of those levels is different pricing as well. So I have a ton of free resources. If somebody just really doesn't have the resources to buy anything, they still can get a lot. I even think about when I first started my podcast, I didn't even edit my podcast. It was raw and real, and I ended up getting into so many countries. We were in something like almost 190 countries now. And so it was like in the top 1.5% and globally for the most shared and followed globally. And this was done, no editing, raw, just me talking about information, bringing people on to talk about what others want to hear, and like just supporting my audience of sensitive and neurodivergent people. So I think that that's really helpful too, and also creating those levels, like you've got the free quizzes or the different free downloads, and then you've got like maybe I have courses or books that would be like lower priced, and then my things that would be like consultations with me would be higher priced. But in reality, that there's something for everyone, and I think that that's helpful too. And I've had people tell me, I've been listening to your podcast for years, and now they, 2 years later, they book a consultation with me. So it's like you create this flow, and I think I kind of just believe in approaching things with my heart rather than if I'm thinking about how am I going to make money doing this, because that sensitive people feel that, and that's not authentic, and that's not going to make anybody connect. So I think approaching it like that, how can I help people? I often tell people, like if I'm mentoring sensitive people in business, I might say something like, because there's so many people get so nervous about putting themselves out there in any kind of way. It's scary. You worry about being judged. But I always think about, can you think of one person that you could help? Like approach this in the way that if I knew this was just going to help one person, that's the person I'm going to focus on. And it takes it out of that internal fear and into how can I really support someone. And I think that makes everything you do better when you're thinking of it like that.
I agree with that. I think going to the individual level also helps with what we were talking about before of just speaking like yourself and being more authentic. It's really weird, for lack of a better word, to try to talk to an audience. It's like, what's an audience? Like, what is that? And then it ends up sounding all formal and strange because you're trying to like talk to this person and this person, and they receive things differently. But if you just pick one and stick with it, I think that is so much better. How do you keep your boundaries around what you need to charge for in order to run a business when there's so much of the content and the information is helpful to people, but at some point there has to be at least a boundary, maybe a line. How does that work for you?
Yeah, I probably approach things so differently than a lot of people are taught. But I do a lot of things based on my intuition on how something feels. Like if I'm going to price something, I actually sit with it for a bit and see how does it feel. Like I also base it on how much energy it takes from me. So if it's a one-on-one, that obviously is going to take a lot more energy from me. And which is why I price it that way. So things that require less energy, I price lower. So I think a lot about energy in general. And you were saying something too about like, if you're thinking about, oh, I'm talking to 10,000 people, it is going to be difficult for that audience to connect to you. But if you're thinking about that one person, and I remember too, when I first started, there was a lot of conversations about, oh, do you want to niche yourself that much? Like, aren't you going to, miss out on so many other people if you're niching yourself so much in just this one particular? But what I learned is that the more you do niche, you have these special focus, and usually it's like your areas that you are particularly passionate about or things that you've worked on yourself. That's how you really are going to connect, because you are talking about something in a way that's like your knowledge of that is more because it is a niche. And that's actually, people who have the most success in business actually are niche businesses.
100%. I mean, I'm a huge fan of businesses that have picked one thing and done it really well for a very long time. And there's so much advice to the contrary of that. It's like, oh, you got to pick something that's going to scale or has a broad appeal. And it's like, well, first of all, are you actually an expert at that? And then second of all, do you want to be an expert at like a bunch of things? I think that's also what people forget about. It's like, well, what do you actually want to be talking about for the next 10, 20 years? Is it something super basic? Like, probably not. It's not necessarily rewarding. Um, for you, in terms of continuing to learn and develop your skill set, what does that practice look like? How do you consume information or learn or continue to become more of an expert in your field over time so that you can distill that and share it with other people? What are your practices around that?
Yeah, it's been really interesting evolving into neurodivergence, because my previous focus was just on high sensitivity, but now we've realized that I've actually been talking this whole time about neurodivergence. We just didn't know it because we were defining it differently. But I think that for me, I've been lucky because I get to interact with a lot of people in my community, whether it's through one-on-one sessions that I'm doing. I also have a community, like an online private community, where we have a lot of conversations, very deep, personal, raw, beautiful conversations. And through all of that, my brain is so good at picking up on patterns too, and saying, oh, wow, everybody's I'm seeing all these things that people are talking about and struggling with, whether they're people pleasers or they have anxiety or they're having burnout is coming up a lot, especially for people that are high achievers. And it's like, I feel like I've learned over the years as a psychotherapist and in my own, I guess, talking about your point, I do a lot of research by talking to people, by watching people who are I love watching like videos on YouTube, even for when I first started learning about what autism was looking like in women, adult women. And then I started realizing that, wow, we're actually seeing a lot of differences that nobody's talking about. And so these were like real people who also were learning about it late in life. So they're talking about their personal experiences. I just think it's beautiful that people are out there talking about these personal experiences, because like the DSM, the diagnostic criteria, has not been updated. It's still wrong. So how do now I'm offering assessments for adults that want to find out if they're autistic. And how did I do that? Because the diagnostic criteria is wrong. And so that came up through hearing people's stories, their real experiences, just diving into the interest of that, my own experience, my community's experience. And just, I think that's part of it too, is that I've always evolved by focusing on the things that I'm most passionate about. And I think we shouldn't be afraid to evolve. As we evolve, oftentimes our businesses evolve. And I think it's important to always be doing what we love and not just stay in something because that's what we started. I think initially I even had fears like, oh, when I start to talk about autism now, am I going to lose my audience? Because now I'm talking about autism. And, there are some people that I will lose, but for the most part, I've actually been talking about autism this whole time. We just didn't know it at the time. So now there's just so many people in my audience that are like, this is so life changing. Like my life has gotten so much better because I understand myself now. And so, yeah, continually evolving, continually learning, but staying in the lane that you feel passionate about, because that's what shows up in your work. Because if you're feeling stagnant, your audience is going to feel that and they're going to lose interest in what you're saying. So stay in that place of being passionate. And it's almost like a calling, I think. Like for me, it's a calling.
Yeah, completely. And I think it is very obvious. If you don't actually care about what you're talking about, it's going to show up. You're going to have a different tone of voice, a different, sparkle in your eye, whatever it is. It's, probably a mix of verbal and nonverbal cues, but people can tell if you don't actually care about what's being talked about. And I wanted to reiterate what you said about learning there, which I thought was really helpful, which is it sounds like you're hearing all these inputs, whether it's from your audience or you're watching videos, you're consuming information and stories and anecdotes from people, and then you're kind of formulating those into ideas and thoughts and like assessments in this case. And I like that a lot because it's like, you're right. I mean, I think in a bunch of industries, whatever the like written book is from 10 or 20 years ago is mostly not accurate anymore. And so how do you actually take, a bunch of quantitative data or qualitative data like stories and turn it into quantitative data? You have to get a bunch of stories. You have to learn from a lot of people. And so I like that method. I think that's really cool and helpful to people because that's kind of what everybody else is looking for too, is like, this thing that I'm reading doesn't seem right, but like, what is happening now? And if you can be that source of information gathering, then super, super helpful to people. So I like both of those points. It's really helpful.
Thank you. Yeah, it's amazing. And it's amazing to help people. And I think that like having a business that helps people is like, how could you do anything better? I get
Right.
messages from people every single day on like how I've helped them change their life in some way. I mean, it's just such beautiful work. And I'm really lucky that I get to do this work, and it's evolved so much over time, and it continues to evolve, and I evolve, and we all keep learning together. And it's like, it's a really neat process. And even the idea of you creating these quizzes, I mean, I think about like all the different people. It isn't just about helping people make money, but there's like, in my case, your quiz has helped me connect with audiences. That's helped me connect with people that then get to learn more, and then their lives get better. I mean, it's really a big part of that.
That's awesome, because that was what we wanted it to be from the beginning. It's like, this is a way to build connections. It's not supposed to be, even though sometimes it does get used for this, it's not supposed to be a way to just like make a quick buck or convince people to buy something. It's meant to be, you're a creator, you're a business owner, you are a brand, and you're trying to build connection with your audience because you actually care. Like, you actually want to do that. You're not just trying to manipulate people to buy something.
Yeah.
And so that's great to hear, because that's exactly what we intended for it to be. Is just like, here's an entry point to start connecting with Julie. From there, you can consume the much more in-depth stuff and listen to the podcast on an ongoing basis, and you feel this sense of connection. That's perfect.
Yeah, it's almost like matchmaking. You're matchmaking through the quiz, because if somebody doesn't relate to what I said on the quiz, they're probably not going to look at the rest of my educational, resources. But if they do, now there's like, wow, I'm going to have so many people say that to me. They're just like, I landed on your website, whether it was from this quiz or something, and it's like there are so many things that are helping me. And it's improving lives, and that's such a beautiful thing. Like, it's an entry point into improving people's lives.
Yeah, 100%. And that's exactly what you want too, right? Like, none of us wants to waste people's time, and using something like a quiz where you really can show a lot of yourself in the way that you talk and ask questions and the things that you ask about, people will automatically, be able to tell, this is not what I was looking for. I'm looking for something else, which is great. Like, that's also helping people. Like, it's helping them save time, not investing in the wrong thing that's not actually what they were looking for. So I really like that point as well. As we wrap up here, where can people find your podcast? Because we've talked about that a couple times. And then, what's your website, and anywhere else that like people can go after listening to this to kind of see the behind the scenes of what we've been talking about, of how you actually bring all this stuff into the world.
Yes, everything is on my website. You can go to juliebjelland.com, or if you don't know how to spell that, you can go to sensitiveconnection.com, and you go to the menu and you'll see the podcast, the blog, the community, courses, all the free resources that I have, lots of stuff. You'll see the quizzes that we've talked about. So yeah, you can find everything there.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much, Julie. This was an awesome conversation. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.